Hi to the learners of nursing research. Our topic for this discussion is literature review. After you have clearly identified your problem and clearly defined your problem, the next step in the nursing process or the research process is literature review. So you'll be viewing literatures, you'll be reviewing them, you'll be checking on the internet, you'll be checking on books, journals, newspapers, and studies available to us to determine what are the literature available for your study. What is the purpose of having your literature review? One, to get relevant information. What's the information about your problem as of the present? Second, to have a background information. Were there studies that have been conducted related to your research? Are there government policies that are related to the research that you are embarking on? Third, to find theories that explains the existence of the problem. Along your review of related literature, you will notice that there are studies which are anchored to a specific theory, or there are studies which are grounded on a specific theory. While you are doing this search of literature, take note of those theories because you might be able to use that during your conceptual and theoretical literature review. Next, data that confirm the existence and seriousness of the problem. So for example, if you would want to embark on a study on student engagement in online class in a Philippine setting, what does the available data say about this? Are there information about student engagement from the US? Are there information on student engagement from China, Japan, Singapore? And how would that apply here in the Philippine setting? Or for example, if I am interested to know the quality of online education at present, I might be wondering what's the current internet status of the Philippines? What's the current connectivity status of the students in the Philippines? What's the current connectivity profile of the students or residents of the Philippines? If I am worried, for example, about the knowledge on dengue, do I have data that would say that there is an increasing cases of dengue at present? So you need to do a literature review to find out if there will be data that would confirm the presence or existence of your problem. Next, so why review literature? It's a must in research, and it can help a researcher identify, develop a research problem, formulate a research framework, and identify and use appropriate research methodologies and tools. What do we mean by this? If you are having your literature review, along the way you'll be able to find instruments. Let's say, for example, I would want to explore on the stress, anxiety, and depression among student nurses in this time of pandemic. And while I'm doing the literature review, I found that there is a scale that would be able to measure sadness, anxiety, and depression, or stress, anxiety, and depression among these students. So it is your literature review that will be able to give you a tip as to how to measure the variables that you intend for your study. Other than that, it will be able to help you determine to have the appropriate research tools. Let's say, for example, you're planning to conduct an experiment. You would want to test the effectiveness of a certain drug when it comes to its oncologic properties. It's wise for us to understand that we do not do drug studies to humans immediately. So through the review of literature, we'll be able to find out methodologies that will be able to help us proceed with our problem without right away jumping into procedures that were not done before. Next. So related literature also helps the researcher identify and define the research problem. Some of you might be still bugged as to how their research problem will be accurately identified. So it is the research literature or related literature that would be able to help you do so. It also helps prevent unnecessary duplication of a study. For example, if I would want to measure knowledge, attitude, and practice about breastfeeding, and then I came to realize there was the same study conducted in the locality 3 to 6 months ago, I don't think I need to conduct this research. I might need to change my problem. Next, it also helps justify the need for studying the problem. Let's say, for example, there is a literature that you found 10 years ago who explained on the same characteristics, the same variables that you are looking into. One thing that we need to remember is that if it's 10 years ago, I might be able to say, oh, I can conduct this study right now. because this is something new. This is something that needs to be updated. As I mentioned earlier, the literature could be a theoretical basis for the study. A researcher may use or adopt the same theory or theoretical framework used in the related studies. Oftentimes, in the undergraduate level, it is a bit challenging for us to look for the theory that would match our study. To that effect, you need to have your review of related literature. That is why, when you are reviewing your review of related literatures, you're not supposed to stick on the abstract of the research study. You're not just supposed to stick there on the abstract and then read introduction, purpose, methods, results, conclusions. That's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to read and review the entire research paper in such a way that you will be able to find out, you will be able to pull out what is necessary and needed for your research. Oftentimes, this is where researchers would come to understand that other researchers are also interested in the same problem. Okay, so we don't want to be really different from them. Instead, we would want that the knowledge generated from these different types of researches will be able to jive one another. In addition, the review of related literature also enables the researcher to learn how to conceptualize a research problem and to properly identify and operationally define study variables. In other words, if you are not yet clear with your variable, the review of related literature will be able to help you how to define this variable, how to categorize this variable. As long as you'll be able to cite, as long as you'll be able to mention the author that is the reference that you are using for the conceptualization and operational definition of the term, that is allowable. Next, the review of related literature is also a basis for identifying and using an appropriate research design. So for example, if you are embarking on a study about the quality of life among children with epilepsy, you might be thinking to embark on a qualitative research because you're thinking of quality of life. But during the review of related literature, you will realize that there are already several questionnaires which were developed, which were tested for reliability about quality of life. And for instance, there is already a specific questionnaire for the quality of life among children with epilepsy. So it will be able to guide you that this study needs to be a descriptive correlational study rather than a phenomenological study. Or, for example, you will find out that on the topics that you have searched, there are already several topics or several researches that have been done on the topic. So what can you do? Instead of conducting a descriptive or a comparative or a correlational study, you can embark on a systematic review, a meta-analysis, or a meta-synthesis. So these methods, systematic review, meta-analysis, and meta-synthesis, would allow you to compare and contrast different study results. Next, it also provides lessons for data analysis and interpretation. There are studies which test for the reliability of the questionnaire. In fact, there are studies which are focused on a development of a questionnaire or a tool to measure a specific type of variable. So these researches or these literatures will be able to guide you that there are available methodologies to analyze the data and how to interpret the data. Oftentimes, if you're pulling out questionnaires from the web, from the internet, it should be provided. It should come with an attachment on the interpretation of the data available. When to start reviewing related literature? By the time that you are formulating your problem, you should be concurrent to the review of your related literature. And once you have set your mind on that problem, still review the related literature. Because it's your related literature that will help you confirm whether the problem really exists and is worth investigating. Second, it will help us determine the existence, seriousness, and relevance of the problem. Now, what to review and where to get the materials? Because there are a lot of materials available to us. So, what do you need to review and where to get these materials? You have the following sources. It could be a general reference. It could be a primary source. It could also be a secondary source. When we talk about general sources, this would involve indexes, reviews, abstracts. Okay, when I talk about indexes and abstracts, okay, indexes in particular is like a book of abstracts. It's like 20 studies, 100 studies, or even thousands of studies conducted, and then you're just only seeing the abstract. So when I talk about an index is usually published by a field of specialization. So for example, we have the index of studies in internal medicine, we have the index of studies in gerontologic nursing, we also have the index of studies in psychiatric nursing. So this index allows for the dissemination of research which were done in different countries, dissemination of research which were done by different professionals to be grouped together. Now, primary sources. Your primary sources is written by those who conducted the study. So for example, I'm reading a study of, let's point out De La Cruz. Okay, I am the researcher. I'm reading from the study of De La Cruz about his results and findings. So that's a primary source. I'm reading from the book or from the thesis that De La Cruz himself made. Secondary source. When I talk of secondary source, it's like I'm reading about the study of De La Cruz as cited, as quoted by De Los Santos. The originator of the information, the author of the information was De La Cruz, but this time I do not have access on the writing of De La Cruz. Instead, I am reading it through the writing of De Los Santos. You refer to that one as secondary sources. So these are publications where authors cite the work of others. It's referred to as secondary source. Whenever both of the sources, primary and secondary, are available at your disposal, it would be wise for us to opt on the use of primary sources, because the primary sources will be able to give us first-hand information about the research. The secondary sources may be reliable, however, due to transmission and transfer of information, it is more prone to errors compared to that of the primary sources. So if you will be doing primary sources citation, it would appear as open parenthesis, De La Cruz, and then comma, 2021. But if I'm doing secondary sources, I would be saying, secondary citation, I would be saying, De La Cruz, open close parenthesis, 2021, as cited in the study of De Los Santos 2022, found out that. Okay, that's a secondary source. Now, what are the different steps in literature review? Of course, this is part of the process, and it has its sub-processes. So what are the steps in literature review? One, you review the precise definition of the research problem. Be clear with your research problem. Note the key variables that you would want to investigate on. Then formulate search terms, or others would say keywords. For example, if I would want to study about quality of life among children with epilepsy, my keywords will be quality of life, epilepsy, and then quality of life among children with epilepsy. So when I say search terms, these are the terms that you will be using when you're searching in Google. These are the terms that you will be looking into the glossary, the table of contents, and then the index of the textbook for you to realize that there are literatures available there. So those are your search terms. Now be mindful, okay? Oftentimes, you would want, for example, to study about sadness, and you might be using studies about depression. Or you might want to study about anxiety, but your purpose of studying is on depression. So make sure that your keywords would be able to jive with what you really want to know. What would you really want to learn? The use of appropriate keywords or search terms will be able to give us abundant literature. But if you don't know the proper keywords to be used, you will have a hard time to look for the literature. Okay? Then, using the indexes, so you can go to the references, and you search for the primary and secondary sources. You should be guided this time by your search terms. And you start with the most recent issue, working backwards. So, for example, if it is 2021, by the time that you're listening to this video, okay, you need to review studies from 2020, then 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016, 2015, so forth. Okay? Particularly in the parlance of research, we would recommend that the literatures should be at least 5 years recent. But if your study warrants review of literatures beyond 5 years, we can consider that as long as it is properly justified. Next, you need to list a note or index card the biographical data. Okay? At this moment in time, the use of index card might not be rampant in your age group, but the use of index card could be recommended for you to take note of the important information in the studies or literatures that you are reviewing. In the technological age, instead of index card, you might want to use Notepad. You might want to use Microsoft Word or whatever word processing software is available in your computer. When you are indexing the materials, please take note to note already of the URL, to note already of the citation, and to note already of the references, because that will allow us to hasten the process while you are doing your references or listing your references at the conclusion of your research. And that later on, if you missed some information from the research finding, you'll be able to retrieve it based on the data available to you. Then you need to read the selected reading materials, take note, and summarize key important points. Okay? So, should be able to summarize what are the important things that are being emphasized or what are the relevant things that you were able to find out from this research relevant to your study of interest. Next, there are natures of the literature review. So we have the review of literature, and then you have the review of related studies. Oftentimes, this is confusing because people would say, we're talking about review of literature. Why are we talking about two types now? Okay? If you will be asked if what is the difference between the review of literature and review of related studies, here it is. A review of related literature would involve readings related to the study. When I say readings related to the study, that could come from your textbook, that could come from the policies of the Department of Health, that could come from the policies, issuances, laws by the government, that could come from an expert opinion which is published, that could come from a certain website. Those are review of literature. But when I talk about review of related studies, the review of related studies would involve data-based researches, and that would involve thesis and dissertation results. Okay, so that would involve data-based researches or thesis and dissertation results. In other words, it's a study, it's a research that has been conducted. That's why it's referred to as a review of related studies. In an undergraduate research, oftentimes, depending on institutional policy and practices, we oftentimes have the review of literature separated from review of related studies. So the purpose of that, one purpose of that is that when you are already finalizing the results of your research, when you are already doing the discussion part of the results of your research, you'll just be able to easily check under the review of related studies part of your chapter 2, what are the studies that you need to collaborate, that you need to compare and contrast with your results. Next, when I talk about literature review in general, it will be consist of collection of pertinent readings. The word there is pertinent, so it's not just any reading from any website which can be edited by anybody else. It should be published. It could be unpublished provided it's an academic material. For example, thesis. In the past, there are a lot of theses on the shelves that were not published based on research reports, article, and that could be local or foreign. It would be able also to describe the current knowledge of the problem, the gap that exists in this knowledge, and this knowledge base and its contribution to the present study, to the development on the knowledge on that research problem. In simple terms, your review of literature will be able to look into the knowledge available in the past and connect that with the knowledge here at the present to have a new knowledge that would be applicable in the management of our patients, in the healthcare policy making, and implementation of rules and regulations, in health. What are the different types of related literature? One, you have your conceptual or theoretical literature. This is from the Book of Dan. So I talk about conceptual literature. This refers to non-research materials. In the earlier term, I refer to this one as review of literatures. So it could be authorities, textbooks I have mentioned, viewpoints, interpretation. So your review of literature is equal to conceptual literature or theoretical literature. Whereas the review of related studies is related to, or oftentimes said as, research or empirical literature. And this involves studies and researches, theses, and dissertations, as I have mentioned. Empirical studies. Note that empirical studies would involve observations and experiences prior to the current research, which can help enrich your knowledge and deepen your understanding of the inquiry. Don't be confused, because when you hear the word empirics, it should be already instinctive to you that empirics would involve measurement. Empirics would involve the use of your five senses. That's why when I talk about empirics, it would usually involve research. So you have your research or empirical literature. To reinforce on the purpose of related literature and studies, slide. So you have to demonstrate the researcher's comprehensive grasp of the issues. So it is from the literatures that you are reviewing that you'll be able to capture the true picture of the problem that you are investigating on. Second, it would reflect the researcher's awareness of the recent development. Third, it would be the crucial frame of reference, substantive for the current research. So be able to provide the crucial frame of reference, substantive for the current research. Furthermore, the review of related literature will be able to help us determine where the previous study has ended and where the current study may begin. How is that possible? It is possible that your research is a continuation of a research of another group of researchers. For that reason, you need to know where did they end so that you will know what will you continue on. Or for example, if the group of researchers last year found out that this substance or this concentration of substance is not effective as an insecticide, you might want to explore on higher proportions of the substance. Next, it will also help the researcher discover findings of the previous research that would have a bearing on the current research. As an example, if you're interested on embarking on the study on student engagement in online class, and then you found out that the engagement in online class in Philippine setting is minimal or low, you might need to relate it to other studies and say, in country X, the same finding was found out. But the reason for minimal engagement is not social media, but the workload at home. However, this is contradictory to another study wherein students were found to be very engaged in online class because of their drive to learn. So you would want to know if which study supports yours and which study contradicts yours, in such a way that the reader would be able to discern, okay, this finding might be globally applicable, but this finding is only applicable to this group of population or group of students. Furthermore, the review of related literature will be able to help us determine the researchability and feasibility of the problem under study. Help you identify correct methods, as I've mentioned earlier. Help you identify correct techniques. And then it could be a good source of effective procedures in data gathering. It will also be able to connect the link between the findings of previous researches, and then define terms and suggest assumptions, and then promote critical thinking and reading skills. So, in other words, the review of related literature is not merely a requirement just for you to conduct a research, but it is where your research will be anchored on. It is where your research problem could be improved from, and it is where your research design could be anchored on also. It is a basis of strengthening your research conduct. Next, in your literature review, it's wise for us to understand that we are using APA for the citation. Okay, so APA is American Psychological Association. There has already been 7th edition for the APA. The 7th edition of the APA was released 2021. The 6th edition mentioned in your textbooks was released in 2009. And then the 7th edition was released on the 2020 or 2021. So we are following the 7th edition already. But the changes are minimal from 6 to 7. Hey, if you're wondering what is American Psychological Association or your APA is the same institution that is formulating or publishing your DSM, the diagnostic standards for your psychiatric disorders. Now, for single author, how would be your citation? So, comma, then year of publication. Let's say, for example, it's Porke, comma, 2021. Two authors, how would you say it? It's Porke, comma, Sumagaysay, comma, 2009 or 2020. In your two authors, you need to follow the order that they appear in the published article. It is not routine to say it should be alphabetical. It's not routine to say that it should be reverse alphabetical. It should be based on how they appear on the article. Usually, in a published article, the first name that appears there will be the primary author. And then the second name that would appear is a secondary author. The primary author or the primary investigation or investigator, is the one who is in charge of the research, overseeing the entire research process. Okay, so that's in the case of two authors. The same in the case of 3 authors, 4 authors, and 5 authors. More than 5 authors, you would say Porke et al., comma, 2020. Now, if it is a print sources, you use to find journal sources or periodicals of database and conceptual. So, basically, in either of these type of sources, just make sure that you're using your APA citation. There's a very good site on APA citation that will be shared or have been shared already in your LMS. So kindly look into that. So what are the guidelines to remember while writing the literature review? Okay, literature review. I'm sure you'll be writing this. This is among the lengthiest chapter on an undergraduate or in any research endeavor. The review should not be a mere collection of quotations. What do we mean by that? It is not supposed to be Porke in 2020 said, quote unquote. Then De La Cruz in 2019 said, and then De Los Santos in 2019 said, then blah 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 in 2018 said. No, it is not a mere collection of quotations. You should be able to group the literatures based on the relevance on your research, which means that you can group literatures which would have the same findings, and then say, in contrast, this is contradictory to the findings in this another set of literatures. And it should not be merely quotations, because you are not supposed to copy-paste the literature. You're supposed to understand the literature and write it in your research the way you understood it with some implications. It is also not merely a series of summaries or abstracts, because if it will be series of summaries, you'd rather not put it in your literature. Okay? It must be well-integrated discussion of several variables of the problem understanding. Let's say, for example, knowledge about dengue fever. I could not say knowledge in China is high, knowledge in Philippines is high, knowledge in Brunei is high, knowledge in blah 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 is high. That's just enumeration. No. Instead, we would want to know that, for example, just as an example, in country X, the knowledge in dengue fever was found to be high, according to the study of Porke in 2020. Among the problems in the knowledge is the data transmission, or the transmission of dengue, and then the type of mosquito that causes dengue. With this, the country X has formulated policies in order to mitigate the spread of dengue. The program was blah, blah, and blah. So I was able to explain, I was able to discuss. Another way for you to discuss your review of related literature is to specify the respondents and then the context when the study was conducted. Let's say, for example, talking about student engagement in online class. I can say, according to the study of Porque in 2020, it was found that students are minimally engaged in online classes. The study involved 200 student nurses from 3 universities in the province of Country X. They are from private universities. According to Porque, it was found that social stigma, social media exposure, and socialization intent are the factors which would influence their engagement in online class. That way, I was able to relate to the reader that the study of Porque was about student nurses in private universities, in such a way that if he will be reading from it, he will be able to discern that's okay, this is from private universities. This might be the reason why De Los Santos at present would want to conduct a study among public schools. Okay? You should be able to say the story. Should be able to say the story out of the literatures that you are reading and reviewing. And when you are presenting the review of related literature, it would usually depend on institutional format. But the usual that we follow is that review of concepts and then review of literature. Under the review of concepts, all your variables should be discussed. Okay, your independent variable is your subtopic 1. Your dependent variable is subtopic 2. Then review of related studies. Under the review of related studies, your independent variable is subtopic 1, dependent variable is subtopic 2. So if you have several variables under study, all of these variables should contain subheadings under your review of related literatures. That will be all for this topic. Thank you very much for your attention. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.